The 7th chapter features tools, resources, and guidance for serving English learners who opt out of English learner programs. Chapter 7 includes tools intended to help educators in appropriately supporting English learners and communicating with the families of English learners who decide to opt out of English learner programs. The local education agency must provide guidance in a language parents can understand to ensure that parents understand their child's rights, the range of English learner services that their child could receive, and the benefits of such services. OELA resources, such as the Newcomer Toolkit and the English Learner Family Toolkit, discuss the guidance for informing the families of English learners regarding decisions to opt their child out of English learner programs and the importance of monitoring and supporting English learners who opted out in their language development as well as academic achievement. The Institute of Education Sciences also has a toolkit that speaks to the same topics for educators of immigrants and refugees in secondary schools. The non-regulatory Title III guidance released by the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Elementary and Secondary Education, OESE, in 2016 provides guidance on informing English learner families about their rights to opt out of English learner services for their children and provides information on supporting English learners who opted out of English learner services. State and local educational agencies that receive Title I or Title III funds should be familiar with the requirements of Title I and Title III and ensure parental notification letters include all statutorily required elements. These resources on this slide and more can be accessed through the NCELA website and through the links on the slide. Next slide, please. Chapter 7 of the English Learner Toolkit provides users with the guidance to collect and analyze district data on English learners who receive and don't receive specific English learner services and share with parents who decline English learner services prior to completing the opt-out process. This slide features some of the main points from Chapter 7. In the toolkit, additional guidance and information on serving English learners who opt out of English learner programs are provided. We're now going to turn to our panel to discuss this topic further. Hello, everyone. My name is Kristin Simonne, and I'm from the Office of English Language Acquisition. I'm joined today by Sibel Hughes from the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education and Bob Measel from the Pennsylvania Department of Education for our panel on serving English learners who opt out of English learner programs. Thank you, Sibel and Bob, for joining us to share your expertise on this panel today. And I'll go ahead and get us started with the first question. So, what are the state expectations for monitoring students who opted out of English learner programs? And how do you support districts in monitoring student progress? Sibel, would you like to begin?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me here today. It's my pleasure. We review districts' English learner education programs every 6 years per the requirements in our state law. One of the compliance criteria is about the expectations for monitoring students whose parents opted out of ELE services, English learner education services. I should also say that in Massachusetts, our core content teachers are required to have an SEI endorsement, and all English learners are required to be assigned to SEI endorsed teachers. SEI endorsed core content teachers obviously shelter the content instruction and make it accessible for their English learner students. So in reality, opting out in Massachusetts is only opting out of ESL instruction. They already get this sheltered content instruction piece of the programs. So our office developed a monitoring form to support districts' monitoring activities. This form guides district teams through the monitoring process and brings a kind of a standard approach statewide to ensure that we have processes in place to meet the academic and linguistic needs of opt-out ELs. So based on the prompts on the form, districts analyze attendance and tardy data, assessment data, and also gather input from opt-out students' core content teachers. Core content teachers are expected to have regular observations of student participation and performance and share their findings with district teams. Based on the results of the monitoring activities, districts can decide that a student is on the right track, or they can refer the student to student support teams if they are not on the right track, or they may determine that language proficiency is a significant barrier still, preventing the student from meeting grade level academic standards. In this case, they may select some action steps, such as tutoring, parent communication, summer school, or any other step that can help the student make progress. Our department is also required to provide English language proficiency benchmarks for individual English learners, all of the English learners. And this is basically a target number students are expected to meet when they take access test. Since opt-out students are also English learners, they also have an English language proficiency benchmark. Like other English learners, if opt-out students do not meet their benchmarks, then districts need to establish personalized goals for these students to work on. And they also are expected to assess and track their progress and identify which resources and services are available to help them improve.
Great. Thank you so much, Sibel. Bob?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm Bob Measel. I'm the ESL Bilingual Ed Advisor and Title III Director at the Pennsylvania Department of Ed. And thanks for having me for this. In Pennsylvania, I guess, I mean, my answer will be fairly concise. I suppose we don't really have different expectations for students who parents have opted them out. In Pennsylvania, we do make a distinction. We don't call it opt-out. We call it parent refusal of specialized services to differentiate it from the terminology that's usually used for assessment, which is opt-out. We just don't want there to be confusion. But I will call it opt-out for the purposes of this discussion. But in any case, we don't really have different expectations. I'll get into what we consider opt-out and what's allowable in a minute. But for students whose parents have opted out, we expect that districts monitor, that teachers and districts monitor their progress like they would any other EL within the content classes and the courses that they are participating in. And if the students are struggling, then the expectation from the state, codified in our guidance and policies is that districts take, steps to remedy whatever is the root cause of the struggle for the student. Then, of course, they still participate in the annual ELP assessment. And the only difference is that ELD instruction can't be delivered by an ESL teacher in a specialized separate setting. We still expect, under our state regulations, that ELD is still part of their academic program. It just has to be delivered within content courses, usually through collaboration between ESL and content teachers. So I guess the bottom line is our expectations aren't that different. We are very careful to not telegraph to districts that these students are monitored. Monitored means former EL in monitoring stage. So we don't want there to be confusion there. What we want districts to do is to ensure that ELD is still a component of their academic program. It's just the way that it is delivered under an opt-out situation is slightly different, but they still have to attend to all the same, I'll use the word monitoring of the students' progress to make sure they're not struggling. If they are, we do expect that they take steps to remedy whatever the root cause of that is.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Bob. Our second question, and this time we'll start with you, Bob. So our second question is, what framework does your state have in place to ensure that districts understand their obligations if students opt out? Bob?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So we have a pretty comprehensive guidance document that's published for districts in the state. I'll go over some of the salient features of it really quickly here. So we require up front, in accordance with federal requirements, obviously, that districts provide certain information to parents at the time of enrollment, namely a detailed description of the program in language that the parents can understand. the benefits it would have for the students and evidence of its effectiveness, so that if parents do decide to exercise their right to refuse the specialized services, it's voluntary and informed. Beyond that, we do require that. Well, I should start with saying that we don't allow districts to recommend an opt-out to parents for any reason, and they cannot make any program component contingent on opting out. And then beyond that, we do have some specific criteria. Like I said, we had to describe in sufficient detail to the parents what the program is like and the benefits it will have for the students. They have to inform the parents of their right to decline the program or services in whole or in part, and supply them with a state-required English language development program parental waiver. Districts have to ensure that parents don't opt their children out of any ELD program or service based on schedule conflicts or other kind of program issues, such as special education or things like that, or insufficient space or the availability of ELD programs. Also, in our guidance, we remind districts that ELs whose parents have opted them out of the program are still required to participate in the annual ELP assessment. They have to maintain the student's EL status, active EL status, and reporting to the state. They've got to provide English language development instruction with the general education content area instruction to meet their needs throughout the academic program, as they would for any other EL, although they can't do it with the benefit of specialized separate ESL services or ELD services. We do require that districts notify parents if students begin to struggle of the benefits of the program, or remind them of the recommended placement, so that they can reevaluate that decision periodically throughout the year if those things do come up. And then present the ELD program inclusion form to parents if they do wish to re-enroll their students in the LIEP that was recommended at the time of enrollment.
Thank you. Thank you. Sibel, how about your framework in Massachusetts?
Yeah, pretty much similar to Bob's, actually, in Pennsylvania. So all the obligations that apply to English learners obviously apply to opt-out students as well, since they are still English learners. They are coded as English learners. So in Massachusetts, we have a comprehensive guidance document on English learner education services and programming. This guidance document includes information about expectations and obligations if a student's parent declines services. As Bob just said, we also remind in this guidance districts that they shouldn't advise parents to opt out of ESL services. So that's an obligation as well. But to better communicate requirements, our office also developed a framework that outlines all of the legal requirements, including opt-out requirements, including state and federal guidance on these topics. And we also provide implementation guidance to districts in this document. We inform districts with this framework what can count as evidence of compliance and how they can document their compliance. So we communicate the content of our guidance and ELE criteria framework through webinars, network meetings, and trainings for districts who are in the process of having a program review or an orientation to prepare them for their corrective action plan development sometimes. And I heard it in the panel before ours that these webinars and network meetings became even easier to have now after COVID. So we are all used to a virtual environment. So it became quite easy to communicate with districts. And of course, ongoing technical assistance from our team members.
Thank you, Sibel. So one more question. At the state level, how do you support the district's obligation to communicate to parents and families to ensure a full understanding of EL services? And Sibel, would you like to start?
Sure. So our state law requires our districts to share a very detailed parent notification form with parents. This form provides a description of district's ELE programs. And this description includes the purpose, method, and content of the available programs. The notification also informs parents of their rights to submit a request if they want their child to be placed in a different ELE program available in the district. This is a parental right granted by the state law, by the Look Act. Also, the same parent notification form informs parents of their right to visit an ELE program, English Learner Education Program in the district, and to attend available conferences or meetings to learn more about the district's English learner programs. During our compliance reviews, we make sure that districts share this notification with the required content with parents every year, and of course in a language they can understand. We also have a requirement to have English learner parent advisory councils if a school district or charter school serves 100 or more English learners, or if English learners comprise at least 5% of the district's or charter schools' student population, then they need to have LPACs. This gives an opportunity to our L parents to be more involved on matters related to their children. If a district has an LPAC, this is a great opportunity, obviously, to build a reliable and effective communication with other L parents. Our department also hosts a statewide yearly parent engagement summit called Better Together Summit, when parents come and learn about academic programs and opportunities, their rights, how to advocate for their children. So more than 250 educators, community-based organizations, family members, and public and private schools and districts work together during this summit. So it's quite impressive. And of course, our office attends the summit to support L parents and inform them of their rights and to build leadership among L parents. In addition to that, we also require our districts to provide information to parents on what it means to opt out of ELE services. For instance, parents need to understand that their children are still English learners until they meet the state's exit criteria. So each year, opt-out students take access tests. Also, they know that their children will be monitored to make sure that they make progress academically and linguistically. Parents also know that the school is required to inform them of the progress their children make in English language acquisition, and that they can change their decision to opt out anytime, right? And now with the Look Act, actually, when our state law was amended in 2017, parents actually are required to review their decision every year and submit their opt-out request annually to districts.
Great. Thank you, Sibel. And you, Bob?
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have a statewide parent advisory. We should do that so we can catch up with Massachusetts. So in Pennsylvania, we have a guidance framework, an overall framework for communication with parents that dictates, it gives the districts the state and federal expectations for what kind of information needs to be communicated with parents and how. Excuse me. Sorry. Screen popped up there. In any case, so beyond that, though, when it comes to opt-out specifically, we do provide forms to districts. There are parent forms. It's a standardized form, and we provide it in the top, I think, 13 languages now. And we're always adding languages in our translation library where we house, I think it's up to 80 or 90 forms now that are fairly standardized around the state. And we provide them in the top 13 languages in the state. And as the budget allows, we add to that bank of forms each year. And we add forms as districts request them. And we review them. But within that library are several forms for parents that explain their right to opt out, what it means, what they're allowed to opt out of, and what they're not allowed to opt out of, because we found that there's sometimes confusion on the part of parents about what opting out means, where a lot of times they might think that they're opting their children out of being ELs, when in fact that's not really the case. So we have a standardized state form that districts can provide to them. Like I said, the top 13 languages. If they need it in a different language, then the district's responsible for interpreting the form locally or translating it locally. But it explains in detail to them what opt-out means, and what they're allowed to opt out of and what they're not, and what the district's obligations are if they opt out of the specialized separate services. And districts are required to provide that to parents at the time of enrollment if they decide to opt out, after they've gone through the guidance that we provide them that explains to parents everything that's on that form. And then we also have a reinstatement form that districts are required to provide to parents. As I stated a few minutes ago in my previous response to the last question, we do require that districts re-engage with parents who have opted their children out of the specialized ELD services each year, or ad hoc during the year if students begin to struggle, so that they can, reevaluate that decision, and they can provide them with a standardized form to reinstate them back into the program if they so choose.
Great. So that concludes our questions that we had, our 3 questions that we had, but I did want to open it up to both of you if there was anything else that you wanted to add on our topic today, serving English learners who opt out of English learner programs. Bob, is there anything else that you wanted to share?
I think I've pretty much covered it all. I mean, the biggest hurdle for us in Pennsylvania is overcoming this belief that parents can opt children out of being ELs. And I think that LEAs, we've tried our best to make it very clear what opting out is, and we've defined what parents are allowed to opt out of. In other words, we've defined it pretty specifically in our guidance as specialized separate services for ELs, which might be sheltered content courses that are comprised only of EL or composed only of ELs, after school tutoring, ESL classes or ELD classes proper, but that does not release them from their obligation to include ELD and all the other content and all the other academic activities that take place throughout the day for the students. The only thing that changes is they are not able to do it with the benefit of separate specialized services. And I think over the years, we've kind of overcome that hurdle. And then it's just a matter of making sure that parents are well informed about what the opt-out provision means and what it does not encompass. So we're always kind of dealing with those issues. But I think that since we've codified the guidance, it's come a long way. I get fewer and fewer concerns and issues brought to my attention each year, as the years go by.
Great, thank you. Sibel?
Yeah, I think I agree with Bob. The biggest challenge is just explaining to parents that opting out does not mean that their students will not be English learners anymore, and that they have to take access tests every year. So I think when we have most complaints is around access testing, because parents think that they can also opt out of the test itself, which is not correct. So that's why we developed a form that we share with our districts. So when parents opt out, they also acknowledge that their students are still English learners. They will still be placed with SEI endorsed teachers. They will still be monitored to make sure that they make progress, and both in academics, also in language acquisition. So that's our attempt to let parents know what opting out actually means.
Great. Well, thank you